When I visited the Legislative Yuan, that's the Taiwanese parliament, I was told that all assessments for social care focus on family power. That was the language that was used, family power. And the whole social care system really is quite predicated on the role of the family. That's the starting point, that's the basis. And it got me thinking, perhaps this is why comparatively few people are recognised by the state as being disabled. In Taiwan, 5% of the population is formally classified as being disabled, whereas the equivalent figure published by the UK government is 24%. That's quite a difference. Mr. Zhou, the Chief of Staff for the Minister of Social Policy, confirmed that only those people with a severe disability are offered any support by the state. And that was interesting to hear. The Taiwanese government are super clear that the main focus of the current Long-Term Care Act is older people, with service centres and nursing homes providing the vast majority of support for people. One such service centre that I had the opportunity to visit incorporates a care cafe, which provides a free lunch to all over 60s in the community, with the aim of building the happiness. And that care cafe was alongside a daycare centre and an urban farm in the same building. Over 90% of the people that attend that service centre have a diagnosis of dementia. The service centres that I visited seemed quite similar to what I imagine buildings-based day services are like in Scotland. I don't have a great deal of experience of those buildings-based day services, but it's kind of what I imagine it to be very similar to. And that's because most older people would live with their family rather than somewhere else, and this day service is an opportunity to socialise, an opportunity for some respite for those family members. After a week in Taipei City, I travelled to the mountainous interior of Taiwan to stay with an indigenous community and to meet the Taiwan Association. They described their role in supporting the community, including in teaching people to relearn traditional skills or crafts that had been lost. And in particular, they talked about how they support older people through their Solidarity chicken rearing programme. And they use chicken rearing as a real mechanism for supporting older people to remain independent, to have something meaningful to do, to care for the chickens. And they were also able to use the welfare of the chickens as an indicator of how well the older person was doing in caring for them. It was absolutely fascinating. The director of the Taiwan Association explained that whereas the government's Long-Term Care Act really focuses on illness, it focuses on disability, he said their programmes focus on people living meaningful and confident lives. And that was a real difference that he wanted to pick out. I visited the social welfare department of the Taipei City government to understand more about homelessness in Taipei City. So the population of Taipei City is about 2.5 million. I think the greater metropolitan area is over 7 million, 7.5 million, but certainly Taipei City, 2.5 million. The director of that place explained that there were currently 600 people who were friends of the street. Language is very important in Taiwan, and so the director did not use the term that we would be more familiar with, homeless or homelessness, but instead talked of friends of the street. Similarly, the word poverty is taboo, so the term low income would be used. And certainly I empathised a lot with what the director was saying. I could really understand that because language is so important for us here in Cairngorm. So whilst the terms may have been different, the sense of importance of the language that we choose to use is really important. I was quite struck though that in a city of over 2.5 million people, only 600 were classified by the council as being friends of the street. The director went on to explain a little bit more about these 600 people. So over 80% of those 600 are over the age of 60. Close to 0% are under 40. And most of them are men. And that really struck me as being quite incredible. Now, one nuance in their statistics is that people are only included in the figures if they've been a friend of the street for over 2 months. So people that are a friend of the street for far shorter are not included in the statistics. After spending time in the office, the director took us downstairs to where people could get a shower, get some food, get some new clothes. And he explained that in the winter, the City Council opens Taipei Main Station as a place for people to shelter from the worst of the weather and the cold. Across the corridor, there was an employability team supporting people to connect with potential employers. I think of everywhere I visited, my experience in the social welfare department was one of the toughest. I found it really quite upsetting and really quite difficult to be there and to hear the stories of these older men, primarily older men, who were friends of the street. I visited the Ministry of Health and Welfare to learn a little bit more about supports for people living with mental illnesses. And I was welcomed by the divisional director, the director of disabilities, several section chiefs, and other experts. It was a little bit overwhelming that so many senior people were offering their time and sharing their expertise with me. They explained the rapid expansion of the clubhouse model for supporting people with poor mental health, much to the envy of colleagues from Austria and Estonia. They really wished, they were quite clear in wishing that their governments could turn small-scale pilot projects into mainstream provision as quickly as the Taiwanese government had done. I know just a tiny amount about the clubhouse model from Scotland, so I offered a small word of caution about the risk of some people experiencing the clubhouse model as a new form of institutionalisation. That was much to the disagreement of colleagues from Austria and Estonia who saw this model as innovative and a panacea for the future. I visited one of the clubhouses. This was provided by the Eden Social Welfare Foundation, and saw a range of books that had been written and illustrated to tell the stories of family members. This was lovely. It included, there was one about a young girl describing living with her older sister who experiences bipolar affective disorder, and she described it as like living with a scary dinosaur. So the whole book was about her experience of living with a scary dinosaur. Or there was a son's experience of his mum's schizophrenia, and he described it as living with 2 mums. The books are appreciated by others as a real form of experiential sharing and peer support. And the foundation told me that most statutory services for people with mental illnesses are really health focused, really focusing in on the person's illness or how it disables them. So their focus as a foundation is mostly aimed at supporting family members to support their loved ones at home, because again, most people live at home. And they do that by providing training, counselling, a helpline. That's how they have the greatest impact. I also had the opportunity to visit the Jianan Psychiatric Hospital in Tainan. That was my first time inside such an institution. Dr. Wu, the medical director and forensic psychiatrist, hosted us, along with about 15 other staff from the hospital. The hospital has 695 inpatient beds, and we were given a tour of many different departments, learning about their approach, how they support people well, and also about some of the cutting-edge research they're doing that has been presented and illustrated at conferences all over the world. In the grounds of the hospital, there is one of 15 halfway houses that are located in the city of Tainan. After being discharged from hospital, many people would go to live in a halfway house. And people can live there for up to 6 years after their inpatient discharge from hospital. As I walked around the halfway house, there were about 10 bedrooms on each floor. Each bedroom had about 4 beds, and there was a shared lounge. So a lot of people were staying together. And I could understand this as trying to, in some way, replicate a community, because community is so important and so powerful, and people traditionally live in their own home with their family. This was some attempt to recreate that opportunity for connection. After the tour of the hospital and the halfway house, I asked about the greatest challenges facing Dr. Wu and his team. In Scotland, we often hear about budgets being insufficient in the NHS. We hear about problems with recruitment and retention. We hear about waiting lists that are so long that people can't access the right support at the right time. But Dr. Wu was very reassuring. He explained to me that the national insurance scheme covers all of their costs, so money is not so much of a problem. He explained that salaries are very high, so recruitment and retention is not so much of a problem. As we left the hospital though, I asked a couple of nurses if they thought their wages reflected their level of responsibility, if their wages were enough, and they had a wee laugh, and they confirmed to me they didn't think they were paid enough. I guess in Scotland, who thinks they're paid enough for the level of responsibility they have in their job? Back in Taipei, I visited the very first independent living support centre, again specifically constructed and designed for people experiencing poor mental health. This was like a small apartment, like a small flat. It had a kitchen, a living room and a library. And they used this as the space to support people with complex mental health problems to develop and to practice the skills of daily living. The programme they run is called Everything Happens in Life. How true, everything does happen in life. And they invite community experts into this space to deliver courses. And it's courses that are requested by the people that access the centre. One of the most recent ones that they had run that they were telling me about was how to get the most out of ChatGPT. So, cutting edge stuff. Eva, the General Secretary, she described the options that people struggling with their mental health have. She said there's psychiatric hospital for people that are acutely unwell. There's halfway houses, there's group homes, but most people live in their own home. She thought too many people were still living in institutions in Taiwan, and she thought that there should be more options to support people to live well in their own community. As we would indeed think that in Scotland as well. Secretary General Eva then introduced us to Superman. And Superman told us his story and the positive impact that the centre had had in his life. It was his first time speaking to a group, as we were, and he did it all in his second language, English. This guy really was super. He was absolutely tremendous. I was so grateful for the opportunity to spend time with him, to hear about his life and his story. He really was quite overwhelming at how generous he was in explaining his story to us, and wow, a super, super guy. And you know, I think in many ways Superman actually encapsulated my whole experience in Taiwan. My experience was one of kind and generous people sharing their expertise, sharing their experiences, sharing their lives with me for a short time. I had an excellent experience. It was so positive, and I'm super grateful to have had the opportunity to spend time in Taiwan. I would say if anyone has the opportunity to visit Taiwan, it's probably not a place you've thought about, but if anyone has the opportunity, I would strongly encourage you to do so. Taiwan is just tremendous.